Hey guys, this is a tutorial on how to retrieve data asynchronously from a MySQL database using AJAX and PHP. So this is my website. Um, in this I create a tutorial on how to retrieve data asynchronously from a MySQL database using AJAX and PHP. And so if I go to this form right here, it's a form that a user enters a username and password. So if I go to this form and type in Billy and click away from the box, you can see it's updated without a page refresh. This username is available, so it's available to take. Now if I type in another username, Adam, and click away, this username, it outputs this username is already taken. Please select another, because it's already in the MySQL database. So if the username already exists in the table of the MySQL database, then I have it output this username is already taken. Please select another. And if I click and enter nothing at all, and then click away, it outputs a username must be entered into this field. So all these I use all of these functions. I use JavaScript on blur function. So when the user goes to a text box, types in something, and then clicks to like a next box to enter in the password, that's when it'll update asynchronously. So if I type in, what's another name, Diane, this username is taken. Another name that's in there is Peter. So it says this username is already taken. If I type in Jasmine, this username is available. So all this is done asynchronously without a page refresh. So I'm gonna just show you real quickly. I created a MySQL table with 3 columns or fields. First one is ID, and the second one is username. The last one is password. Username and password are varchar 50, ID 11, and these are the current usernames that I have in my database: John, Peter, Adam, Rodney, David, Jeff, Joseph, Bob. I just create all the passwords ABC because I never put functionality into this form. It's just to show you how to asynchronously update based on Java Ajax using PHP. So if you type in any of these names, then the code will look through this table, and if the name already exists, is in the database, then we'll output this username is already taken. If it's not one of these names, then it'll output this username is available. So how do we go about creating the code? So I'll just quickly go over it. I'm not going to write code from scratch in this tutorial. I'm just going to go through it real quickly. So this right here is a JavaScript code. We create a function called check username, and this will check the username that they enter into the username text box to see if it's available. We create a variable called requests because we need a request object in order for the browser to get in contact with the server. So this is required in AJAX. Like, we have to create a request object. So I created their variable name request, and then these are the where it actually creates the request object. And we do try catch statements just in case one browser can't create a request with one line such as this, then it will try the next one, and if that fails, then it will try the next one. So these are a series of statements we have so that if a request object can't be created in one browser, then it can try other techniques. And lastly, if it's not able to get one at all, then request is null, and it won't be able to get in touch with the server. So you won't be able to get any information from the server at all. But normally, if you use one of the major browsers, then it should almost surely work, where you will be able to get a request object to get in touch with the server. And here we create a variable called URL. This is called process.php. This is the PHP file that that has the PHP code that processes the data that the user sends in, and then that will use to get make a connection to the MySQL database, search the table that we want to search, and then search the username's entry of the table so that we can see if the name is already taken. So you're going to create a separate PHP file, and that's going to have your PHP code that processes the data that the user enters. The data itself that we enter in now is retrieved with the with JavaScript, the document.getElementById function. So I created, if I go down further in the HTML code, I created a form. I set the action equal to blank because we're going to process it, because it doesn't have functionality, so it really doesn't matter later. I never set this form for functionality, so I just set that equal to nothing. I set method equal to post. That again doesn't really matter because the form doesn't really have functionality. So yeah, you could just skip that part. So right here is what we need to be concerned about. Enter a username. So I created a text box for the username, as you're able to see above. The ID is username underscore entered. So that's what we use to get the information via the document.getElementById function. So the ID will be username entered. And then here on this same text box, I use the onBlur function to call the check username function. This again was the JavaScript function that you saw above, check username, right here. So when the user clicks away from the text box, this is when this JavaScript function is called. And then when we do that, this again, we create a request object to get in touch with the server, and then we make the other parameters necessary. So we already have the process.php file. We'll later do that, but just realize you'll have to have a separate PHP file, and whatever you name the file goes, you put in the variable URL. And then here we get the value that the user entered into the username text box. So document.getElementById username entered dot value. That gets the value of the text box. And then we do the same for the password box, even though we don't really add functionality to that because we're just checking the username in this code. And then we create another variable called vars, and this is a very important variable because this is how the PHP code in the PHP file will be able to extract the information. So how this works is the variable vars functions in name equals value pairs. The first pair is username equals, and then plus user, because here we made the variable var user, and then that got the value that the user entered into the username text box. So we use username equals plus user plus and ampersand sign symbol password equals, and that's the second name pair, password equals, and then because we made the password variable pw equal to document.getElementById password entered that value, we say end password equals plus pw. So this name pair, how we'll in the PHP code, you'll see we extract the value that the user has entered into the username text box by this this name value, which is username. So this is what we'll extract, and this is what this is what we'll extract to get the password. So it's the name element of the pair that we use to extract, that the PHP used to extract what the user entered into these username and password text boxes. So I'll go back to that. So you don't have to really worry about that. I'll go back and show you when we are in the PHP code. So request.open, I use the post method to for data extraction. URL, this again is from this line, so we know to go to the process.php page. And true means that we want an asynchronous request. And then this line of code right here is useful because we want, say if this is the ampersand symbol for each text box that you have that you want to extract data from. Like I said, these are name value pairs. So username is one name, and the value is user because that's what we extract from the JavaScript username text box. And then password is another name value that we use. So say if your password had the sand, I believe that's what it is, and symbol, ampersand symbol in the actual password, or you had a field that had it, it might get confused and throw an error because certain key values such as this are very important. So if you have a symbol such as this in the variable value, then it might throw an error. So we encode it with this line. So that's what this is for. Okay, so now we're back to the server. This line is just so that you know when the server is ready to communicate, when it's done with like getting the asynchronous request from the browser and it's processed it and it's ready to send back data. This is 4 is its ready state, and this means that everything is okay to process, I believe. This just line shows that that the server is just ready to process data. That it got the request back and it's all set to, to do everything like send back data. So that's why we use this if statement. And then we create a variable called return data, and that is set equal to request.response text. And basically what this equals, the attribute response text, it's, let's say if you create the PHP file and then in the end you want to echo this username is available, just like you saw at the beginning of this video. The response text attribute gives the final PHP data from the PHP file. So if the PHP has like if statements and it's set equal to a certain if statement so that it says this username is available, that text from PHP gets sent to this return data variable. So this might hold this username is available. And how we get that from the PHP text is through this line, request.response text. So this is the final output from the PHP file based on the processing that it did to see if the username is available or not available. And then that final data gets put in this variable. So that's the importance of that line. And then this line is specific to the current page that we're on. So document dot get element by ID status dot inner HTML equals return data. That is, it looks for an HTML tag in the current page that has the ID status. It then changes the inner contents of that file through the .inner HTML, and then it sets that equal to return data. So that was the data we have from the final output of the PHP file. whatever the page that you have. So right next to the username, text box, I put a label HTML label tag with an ID of status. Therefore, that will we then use the JavaScript function document.getElementById status right next to the text box, and then .init.html changes the contents to whatever the PHP file outputs. So that's the significance of that. And then finally, we actually do the request sending to the server, so that all this can be done. And this again I showed you was HTML code. It's very basic. You just create the text box and then make sure you use the onBlur function to call the check username, the JavaScript check username function, so that all this process can be done once the user clicks away from the text box. So that summarizes the JavaScript and HTML code. So now we go to the PHP code. So now I created a username entered variable, and I use the post method to retrieve username, and that's how the PHP can get the value that the user entered into the username text box. So how do we get this element? This is just a PHP variable we create right now, username underscore entered, and then we use the post method, and then where does the username come from? And then this goes back to what I said before with vars, or this is gotten from this username. Remember, it's the name attribute of the name value pair that the PHP is able to extract the data from the text boxes. So we use username and we use password to extract data in the PHP file. So this is how we, going back to the PHP file, this is how we do it. You see user C password. So that's how we're able to, PHP is able to get those files. And then from there, it's just all PHP from here. We have to get a user password, host name, database, and table to connect to the table that we want on the MySQL database. We use the MySQL connect function to connect to the database. We send a query so that it selects the username. It selects the username column from the table where the username is equal to what the user enters. So we could check if the username column has the username that the user has entered. Then we count how many rows are returned based on that query. So if a row is returned, that means the username is taken, and it's because it's in the database. So that's why I was able to return a username based on what the user entered. So if it's 0, we know that name isn't taken. If it's 1, we know that it is taken, or else it wouldn't have returned a row. So we now just have the last line of code. If empty username entered, which is username, then what the username entered, the user entered into the username text box, we echo a username must be entered into this field. Else, if it's not empty, if the username is not empty and the count equals 0, remember this shows that no rows were returned, so that means the username doesn't exist, because we query it to see if the username, if the username that the user entered is currently in the MySQL database. So if it's 0, that means it doesn't exist because it hasn't turned back a row. And then we typed in this username is available, so it can be selected. Else, I just echo this username is already taken, please select another. So this is all the code that's needed to create a responsive text box. Yeah, this is all that's required to create a responsive text box with AJAX, and yeah, that's all. And it's very, you probably see this on the web all the time. It's very popular, very widely used, and this is how we can retrieve data from a MySQL database using PHP.